From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics here with the Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today, I'll be sharing an interview with Trygve Olson. He is a senior advisor for the Lincoln Project. Now, if you haven't already heard of the Lincoln Project, it's a group of former Republican Party members and conservatives who oppose Trump and his reelection. In our conversation, Trygve basically addressed his concerns about Trump as a possible threat to democracy, but here's the interview. All right, well, Trygve, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
My pleasure. It's good to be on.
Yeah, so I just want to get us started off right away talking about the upcoming presidential race. Obviously, a really big deal in Wisconsin. You're working with the Lincoln Project as an advisor. What are some of the main concerns that you and Lincoln Project have about a second Trump presidency?
Well, I think so. So my background is a little bit unique. I cut my teeth working in Wisconsin politics back during the Tommy Thompson era. I worked for that broader world, and then in '94, while I was still in that world, I was asked by an organization John McCain ran to go work in Poland right after communism fell. And we ran a Get Out the Vote campaign, like an MTV style Get Out the Vote campaign. It was one of the first ones outside the US. And so my career really ended up going on two paths. One is a road often traveled, working at various levels in Republican politics, and eventually working on a couple of presidential campaigns and helping Mitch McConnell's political world run his political world as part of it. And then the other was I spent all these years working for the International Republican Institute that John McCain led in countries like Russia, Belarus. If you name an autocrat, I ended up with kind of a specialty of working in places where democracy hadn't taken hold. And I saw places where democracies had failed. And so, I never imagined that those two paths would come together and that, I used to stand in front of people in places like Ukraine or Russia or Venezuela or wherever, and they would be, taking great risks to come to trainings like, how do we fight for democracy? And I would think to myself, would I stand up and fight like these people? Would I be one of the people showing up at a seminar like this if it were under threat in my own country? One of the lessons that I learned from that is that when people with autocratic personality disorder start telling you things that they're planning on doing, um, you have to take them at their word. It's like Vladimir Putin, Lukashenko, the autocrats, they all said what they were going to do. And in Donald Trump's case, he can say, I'm distancing myself from Project 2025. But in reality, you have to take him at his word when he says that he wants to try General Milley or Liz Cheney or the people who were on the January 6th committee. When you have somebody like Donald Trump who has a track record of January 6th. And really, that's the point. I've been involved kind of behind the scenes with Lincoln Project from its beginning. But I never really spoke up publicly until I sat and watched what was happening on January 6th, because I'm like, I've seen this playbook before. And so, you know, we have to understand that we have a candidate in the race who is not playing the usual game of politics the way we know it, where it's a win-win and we're going to have elections and I'm going to honor the outcomes. We have a candidate in Donald Trump who is saying that he wants power. He's playing the zero-sum autocratic game. And so to me, that's really the stakes in the election. And really, I say this a lot, being from Wisconsin and still spending a ton of time in Wisconsin and still considering Wisconsin home, even though I've traveled and lived around the world. Wisconsin is going to decide who is the next president of the United States. And I truly believe Wisconsin is going to decide whether democracy continues. And it's a small subset of voters. It's Evers Johnson voters. And I will tell you, my beer drinking buddies up in St. Croix County, who are my best friends in life, most of them, we went to Mrs. Happy's play school together. We played hockey together growing up. We still try and get together every time I'm back. I'm going to be in River Falls on Friday for some other stuff. And we will go out to Steve's Pizza. Well, we'll get Steve's Pizza and we'll drink beer at Johnny's Bar. Um, they're Evers Johnson voters. They're going to decide this, and people in Wisconsin are going to take it seriously. So if there are people anywhere in the world that are going to have to decide whether the American experiment continues, I'm glad it's people like my buddies and people in Wisconsin, because I know that they're going to take that seriously. And it's a big choice. And it's, so yeah, I mean, am I worried about where Wisconsin's going to go? I know those people are going to make the choice between Joe Biden or whoever the Democrat nominee is. Whatever they do, and Donald Trump. They're gonna make that thoughtfully. But it's hard to say. I mean, we're sitting here on a precipice.
Yeah. I guess mentioning Joe Biden's presidency and his reelection campaign right now, he's come under some fire following the debate. Some people have concerns about if he's the right person to be the nominee. Do you plan on voting for Joe Biden? And do you have any concerns about his ability to beat Trump?
Well, having seen what it's like and having been in places where democracy doesn't exist and having worked around the world, a lot, particularly in, the Eurasian space. I was declared an enemy of the Belarusian state by Alexander Lukashenko. I was banned from Russia by Putin himself. I can tell you that when you're faced with an autocrat, you vote against the autocrat or a potentially autocratic actor. You vote against him. So, it isn't. You asked me before we got on, do I still consider myself a Republican or a Democrat or what am I? I'm really a centrist. I think Wisconsin common sense, right of center conservative. But I'll vote for whoever the candidate is that's running against Joe Biden. I mean, running against Joe Biden, who's ever running against Donald Trump. Whether that's Joe Biden or, I think it will be Joe Biden, but ultimately that's for others to determine. It's not my call, but I won't be voting for Donald Trump.
Yeah, so you've
And
been.
that pains me as a longtime Republican and somebody who's still a conservative,
Yeah, I was going to mention you are a longtime Republican. So as far as your conversations with other Republicans, do you get the sense that some of them are going to follow suit with you and just want to oppose Trump? Or do you think some of them are hesitant because they don't agree with Joe Biden? What's your sense of that situation?
Well, I mean, I think all these people are making their own choices. And would I'd be wrong to say there aren't people from Wisconsin or people that I worked with in Republican politics that I'm disappointed that they've chosen to sort of acquiesce, because they think, well, there's lots of reasons for rationalizing in people's own minds, and it's not for me to, probably judge them one way or the other, but I think Paul Ryan has been pretty clear that he's not going to the convention. He's not, going to be voting for Donald Trump. I think that's admirable, and there's lots of people on the left who are critical of Paul and saying, well, he should have done more. Well, why didn't he do? But, I wrote years ago for those people I was working with around the world, a series of 7 rules for dealing with autocrats. And, the first one is play the game you're in, not the one you know. You gotta understand when you're going up against an actor who's not part of the win-win of democracy, but is a zero-sum autocratic actor. But another one of those rules is what I call the Stalin rule, which is, Churchill and Roosevelt understood when they confronted Hitler. If you're going up against the worst human being in the history of humanity and Adolf Hitler, you make an alliance with Joseph Stalin, who might have been the second worst human being to ever cross the planet, right? So that you can live to fight another day. And so when people on the left are critical of Paul for not supposedly have done enough, he's on their side now. And they have to understand that the coalition that it's going to take to defeat Donald Trump in Wisconsin or in Michigan or the state or national is going to require, former Republicans, conservatives, people who believe in democracy, people on the left, saying, you know what? maybe this candidate isn't perfect, maybe this situation isn't perfect, but maintaining democracy is the central thing that we have to trumps, for pun intended, trumps everything else.
Yeah, I guess the way the race looks now, what are you thinking as far as what'll happen in November? Do you think that Trump will be defeated? What is your analysis of that?
Um, well, I've said from the outset, it's going to be a small subset of voters in 4 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, that decide this thing. And as you know, being in Wisconsin, right, Donald Trump won by under 20,000 votes in 16. Joe Biden won by just over 20,000 votes in 2020. There isn't really anything to indicate that the election isn't going to be really close again um, in Wisconsin. And as I said at the outset, Wisconsin is going to decide this thing along with Michigan. Michigan was decided, I don't know, 60,000 votes like last time. And Trump won it by, I don't know, 20,000 time before, right? It's going to be close. It's just the way that it is. It's going to be probably pretty close. Although, I like to believe that at the end of the day, people in Wisconsin, people in Michigan who are very similar, those Evers Johnson kind of voters, they're going to look at this and they're going to say, you know what? I'm going to vote with democracy. Um, and I think you're seeing some momentum. I mean, not in the presidential necessarily, but Tammy Baldwin is running pretty strongly, maybe more like Tony Evers did against Michaels against Eric Hovde, right? And Eric Hovde is running as a pretty mega candidate. If Eric Hovde is only at 39% and Tammy's at 51, you would think that that would be a pretty good barometer of where a generic national race would be in Wisconsin. So, but Wisconsin will be close. Wisconsin's always close. Michigan's going to be close. Pennsylvania probably is going to be close. Arizona maybe a little less so, but
Yeah, well, it's definitely going to be a nail biter, but I guess in the meantime, thank you for coming on the podcast and really appreciate all of your insights into this.
You're welcome. Anytime.
All right, everyone, thank you for tuning into this week's interview. In the meantime, I am Kate Morton. If you want to learn more about the upcoming presidential race, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. But for now, thanks for listening to Capital Chats brought to you by Spectrum.